during that, but I think we're back now.
Okay. My best rants always get interrupted.
All right, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, we're back. Yeah, it cut off somewhere in there.
What was last said. I don't know what was last said, but basically the moral of that story is, it's your job as a GM to attention to the players as well. Like, it's not a good look, but the best comparison is you are babysitting the story. Mm-hmm. And if you have one player that is just completely ruining it for everybody else, you got to find a way to reel that player in, or you got to be like, look, man, you got to do something different, and if they won't, you got to kick them out. Like, that's the thing about being a GM that is that's not fun, is you kind of got to be a manager, and it's like you just can't. Like, we've had to kick people out of our group before for that reason, and it's not fun, but it always ends up with a better game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, being a player in a game where that's what's happening, it's always better to leave it. Like, yeah. I've tried to stick with some games that's like, I'm not feeling this. And it's like, no, this didn't work out. It's rough. But yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you were mentioning yes to Discordia. It's not always Mania. I think that part might have gotten clipped out.
It's not Mania.
Yeah.
Also, it's insanity from knowing too much. And why would that be? I know so much, therefore I'm going to try to kill myself constantly. Like, no, I think he'd know not to do that.
Nerf, I still have old comments, so you're good. I don't know what happened. I might have bumped the button. I don't know. That was weird.
I have the chat still up.
Okay, cool. Good. So we have all the other stuff.
I didn't lose that. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that I, for my first time playing Malkavian, did not play the bad Malkavian. That makes me happy. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, you know how I know that is I don't remember anything in particular that your Malkavian did, which is not anything bad on you, but every first time Malkavian, I can tell you some stuff they did that ruined the game.
Oh, okay. Well, it was nice. The rest of the group was also about as loony with what they wanted to do as I was, so that was pretty fun. Like, that probably also helped.
Having a good group is one of the best things you can luck out with an RPG. And I mean, it's nothing that you can like give advice on how to do, but if you have a good group that is, you kind of want to please, from a GM perspective, you kind of want to please everybody, unless you're just a dick GM who's like, no, we're gonna have fun, and you guys are gonna help me have fun. But if you're like, if you have one person who is just, you have a bunch of people who are like, yeah, I like, random house rules and like world bending, and this doesn't apply here, but why not, But then you have one person who is like dedicated to the rules. Mm-hmm. It's going to cause a dynamic shift, and it's not great, but
yeah,
you can work with that. But yeah.
Lampy says company mandated fun is the best kind of fun, Plate.
It is. You're getting paid to enjoy yourself.
Narf brings up and says, I would say the job of GM is not to present an engaging story, but rather present an engaging world and educate the rules fairly. But then again, I'm a sim player / GM. I don't think that's a bad way to go about it. For most things in this, I don't think there is a correct way. Like, going into it with, here's an engaging world, can be a fine way to do it. But if that's how you want to run it, that's cool. But there's also a matter of like how players want to engage with it. I've had groups that if I do not present a clear story to them, they feel lost and do not have fun. They need like a essentially a checklist of like, here's what we need to do, how they do it, the order they do it, that could be more fluid. But if they just have a world and like a vague goal, they don't have fun and they just kind of sputter out.
Now, if I would, I would also point out that when I define story as in the aftermath, the step back, and what you can tell people once the game is completed, my method is literally the same kind of thing, where I present a world. I have in my own head the ending I want to reach, and I have a engaging beginning. The story and plot it's more of the plot that you set out, but the story is what your players carve out. And explaining the rules of the world is another good thing, because that can also apply to, we're not going to be so strict. I am welcoming some engaging change so long as it makes sense with what we're doing, or we are going to do this by the book. And as long as you get that across and you don't have anyone who's super against it, then you can still make an engaging game on either side. But it is definitely the GM's responsibility to go at the beginning, here's what you're in for, do you want to stay? If
Makes
you
sense.
deviate from that constantly, that's not a good thing, because if your players like something at the beginning and then you just completely change, like if you're giving people wacky things and having fun and at the end it's like, no, this is serious time, like that's not a good GM to me. Like you need to forecast what the coming path is going to be in tone and in levels of seriousness and fun, and not bend to what the players want to do or what you might just on a whim decide to do differently. If you're like, I don't really know what I want to do, don't do it yet. Know what you want to do before you start.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like having that level of awareness. Lampy points out, you mean like suddenly making a first-person shooter midway through an RPG? Kind of like that, yeah.
Correct.
Which
we kind of did once.
But we could. It's also if you're up for that sort of thing, like what you said with forecasting what the game is going to be. That's a big thing that I like push for in like the planning stage and in session 0 of like, here's the general tone, here's what you can expect in some regards, so that like I know how to interact with this world, I know what to expect, I know the emotional stakes to have with it, I know like how to interact with other people, and meta stuff, like I know how to bring up something I'm uncomfortable with, or I know how to put an end to something, need to stop, or introduce something, or like ask in or out of game questions. So yeah, long story short, yes, I agree.
I'm just coming up with this on the fly, so it's not a very clever name, but I would call it the back of the box rule, where like if you look at the back of like a DVD case, you read the synopsis and like, ooh, intriguing, I want to watch this, or you go, well, I know what's gonna happen, I don't feel like I need to watch this. Like it's you got to get that perfect match of like, oh, this is hinting on what's to come, and the tone sounds fun. You're advertising the game they're about to play. So if you can, not necessarily in like a one paragraph explain your game, but that's what the first session is. The first session is the back of the box. Like they should have a idea of what they're in for by the end of the first session. Like, and I am a big advocate of, if at all possible, try not to get into a fight in the first session. It should just be about the world building and the forthcoming story. If you want to get into a fight, that's fine. But as a GM, don't make it a serious fight. Just be like, hey, if this is to drop an artifact, that then they're like, oh, what's this? And then someone's like, hey, you're just for touching that, you got to go to jail. And it's like, what did we find? That kind of thing. Yeah, a scuffle. That's a good
scuffle.
Yeah. Like, I have never actually planned out a character sheet for the first fight. It's just like players tell me what they want to do. I make up a challenge rating on the fly. for a lot of rolls, and then I know what's going to happen in the fight. I let the dice decide in what steps it happens, but I know if they're going to win or not. And that's kind of the point. Is like, you want people to be interested in what could potentially be a year or years long game, depending on how much you want to do it.
Yeah. Deeps also brought up something a little while ago that I like. And Deep said, one thing I try to do is plan events, but not necessarily locations. So no matter which path players take, it leads to where I want them to go. Can't always do that, but I think it's a good way when you can. Absolutely. I think having that idea of a thing and then leaving it a little malleable, super helpful.
I'd like to throw an example of that, which I'm particularly proud of, and it was in the RPG session, the vampire RPG session we did with the Seraphim angels and all that stuff, and Zalgo, because I was just big into Zalgo, so I just stole them. But I knew I wanted my players just in that group to fight a god at the end of it, and I didn't really know how I was going to get there. But at one point, they screwed up real bad with somebody, and because
what
you remember? Okay, there was a guy who was putting together he needed artifacts from several holy locations to put together a weapon that would wipe out all of the occult. And Guy had convinced everybody to let him do it so then they could steal the weapon. And that is not what the story was supposed to be. And I told him point blank, I know GMs shouldn't just directly involve, but he was derailing so hard. I was like, listen, I'm going to tell you this plan won't work. And he did it anyway, and everyone was cool with it. And he tried to do like a willpower thing, and I was like, it fails. And he's like, what do you mean it fails? He would have to be like a level 10 willpower for it to fail. I was like, he is now, because that's part of what he was building.
That you let him complete.
And I straight up told you this won't work, and everyone was cool with it. So the plan I had was the vampires were going to go underground and put themselves into a torpor by staking themselves with a porous piece of wood. And I had an NPC explain this. And they were going to be buried in soft dirt. So over time, it would decay. And eventually it would pop out and they would wake up again. And it took 3 centuries to do it. So now they're in this apocalyptic future where the occult is mostly wiped out. A couple people figured out how to survive. And I was then just given this playground to like, okay, what's different now? Because they have been gone for long enough where everything can be different. And it was like a Mad Max story that I had not planned whatsoever, but the fact that my players screwed up and I did not want to end the game made me make that decision, and it caused my favorite chapter of that story.
And then we ended up fighting that that thing, which was, I'm assuming, what turned into like the god fight you wanted.
Yes, I had planned for that god fight to be the way it was, but in my mind I had no scenery of like where it was happening, what was happening, how you were going to beat him. But then I was like, well, if they've been gone for 300 years, maybe a cult's been built up, maybe humanity is starting to like change and everything. Like, I have all these rules now that can be explained by enough time has passed where this is how it works now. And that's another thing like that I want to address as a GM. Do not be afraid to just make up your own rules, but if you do, you have to stick to those. Like, yes, and yourself, but do not just go, don't worry about that anymore. Like, you've got to play it through.
Yeah, because if it's something that works, it means most of the time the players are going to be invested in that. And then I know as a player to just hear, oh, you don't have to worry about that anymore. It's like, what? Like, I've put thought and care into this. Like, it's even sometimes like a simple thing, like, oh, you have to keep track of ammo. Like that's a choice that you make early on in a game, usually, of like, I'm a gunslinger, I'm, you know, a slingshot or whatever. And then it's like, oh, well, if I have to do that, let me build that into this character. Let me like have something that's, you know, I'm going to spend my money on ammo. I'm going to, you know, and like, I'm going to have special satchels with it. I'm going to build that as part of a personality or something, you know, that I want, that I'm keeping track of this stuff. And then having that gone, be like, but no, that matters to me. So yeah, I agree. If you make a rule, like, do try to stick with it. Unless everybody hates it, then you can kind of figure out, okay, how do we want to move through this and like get past it and change it a bit. But
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say an example of what you're talking about in the same scenario with the apocalypse thing is a thing your character did, where they found a sacrifice, which was like a rusted old city like street sign, and it had like spikes and stuff because it had just been rusted away so bad, but it had crows stuck on the top of it, and it was just, but even though they were clearly long dead crows, it was still fresh blood flowing down the sides, and it had caused like a little bit, 2 strings of blood at the bottom. And Jesse's character was so needing of blood, he was like, well, I'm gonna drink that blood. And I was like, all right, let's do that. And I had this idea that when he reaches down to the puddle, he looks up, and after he's drunk the blood, he sees a vision of the future in between those things, because the Malkavian disciplines caused that to awaken in him, because he drank this like unusual blood. But one of the things he gained from that is something that Vampire is not prepared for at all, and it's that now, if a cultist or anything involved with the you know, future god fight happens, his heart would start beating, and it would be like a dog whistle for danger. And I just remembered that. And it's like, okay, so don't at any point let something happen as a surprise, because I've given a character a neat new thing, but if I forget about that, it won't mean anything.
Yeah. I remember that was really cool. And yeah, so that's a great example of something that matters. And
yeah, just every now and then you guys would walk up to a village and I would say, oh, and your heart's beating. And you're like, oh, okay, so it's serious now.
Yeah, that was cool. We've got a question from Larka, but you had a question earlier that you wanted to ask, so I want to go with you, and then after we do that, we'll get to Larka's question.
Let's go ahead with Larka's, because like,
okay,
yeah.
All right. Then Larka asked, does the same amount of planning go into adventuring events as domestic events, e.g. boss battle versus purchasing furniture for a player's house? How does the planning between the two differ? I like that question. Oh, go ahead.
I would say, again, with have every event leading to the end that you and your players are, the longer you play, are starting to anticipate. So wage how, like, if they're like buying furniture, let's say I'm gonna put, I don't know, a crystal ring in this shop, that if they happen to find it, that's gonna guide there. So let me plan on where that might be. If they do like just a regular search check, what's the challenge rating, what's the percentage rating, all this kind of stuff. But if it's just like a fun, hey, we're gonna go buy weapons, just let them buy weapons, whatever. You know, if it's not gonna really affect the next step in your plan, I just say give them some stuff, let them do their thing, let them play the game how they want to, give them a breather if that's what they're after. But if you decide, like the classic, we're gonna go down to the basement and kill rats, whatever, everybody knows that plot. If you just want it to be a, hey, let's get to know each other, let's see how we fight, then just kind of run that like it would normally be. But if you want to be like, oh, one of those rats talks to them and I want to see if they'll kill it or not, plan that one out.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you want to have just the shopping montage, have a shopping montage. Just be like, I go here, I look for these things. Especially, like, it also depends on like crunchy games versus more, you know, like fluffy ones, where it's like, I want a +2 weapon of this caliber that has this effect and it costs this much gold because this book said so. Like, okay, that's specific, versus being like, you know, I want to go to a magic shop and I want to talk to an artificer and I want them to build me something specific. Like,
and I want them to arm wrestle him for it.
Yeah, it's like I have a need for a sheath for a sword that grows 3 times as long. Like, so I need like a sheath that somehow creates a pocket dimension when I put it in, so I could just pull this thing out for like freaking 30 feet or whatever. Like,
it's as long as you need it to be at the time.
Right. So, like, having something that is more unique could offer something, a little more fun, a little more different. So in that regard, I think it would be a good idea to do that. It's also a great opportunity for role playing, like getting to know the area, getting to know like the kind of social temperature of what's going on. Maybe you could introduce a effect of something the characters have done. They've just wiped out,
Town.
Say
Nothing,
what?
Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Just go past it.
Okay. They just wiped out a group of, something, and now that, this person knows that that happened, or that, there's an effect because of that the players weren't expecting, that this NPC is now talking about, showing that there's, repercussions for their actions. Maybe good, maybe bad. So I think that could be cool. Sometimes, yeah, you just want to do a shopping montage. We all have these items. Cool, let's move on. But I think
on that note,
yeah,
because it touches on what Deebs and Discordian have both just said. I can pull on an example of things where it's like, sometimes just improv with your players. Like, I don't know, is this going to turn into something fun? Because if they give you an idea, you can spin through that and make it more interesting. Like when I just randomly said, it's as long as you need it to be. Well, what about you have a sheath, you found a sheath, and every time, you go to an artificer and it's like, well, there's a sheath that I feel it locked in, but when I pull the handle out, there's nothing there. And like, I don't know what to do with that. And they go, oh, this is a legendary artifact that it forms into whatever is needed, even if you don't know what that is. And so it's like, okay, so like, one time you could be like, all right, I'm going to get into a fight with these guys with, these guys are coming at us. It's like, okay, let's see what we got. And it pulls out and it's like a wheel, and it's like, I wonder why I'm going to need this, it's just like, and then you can just like play with that. But to what Discordian said, a player who can make anything, you had that in a completely house-built game that I did that ran with Pathfinder's system. But I did the biggest mistake I've ever made as a GM, where I built a points system where they could level up anything as long as they had. Well, it wasn't, because I yes-anded it, and the game got ridiculous, but it was fun. Because what I was doing was I was having trouble writing a story, like in my personal time. I was like, I want to let my players play this story and see if it inspires me on where to drive this. And one of the things that I had was there was an ability that was like a psychic branch where you could break materials apart. It's like let's just call it alchemy, because it's essentially what it was. But you could just break things apart and reassemble them as you need. Actually, it's more like Scryed, where they would take material and they could just build whatever. And Jesse at one point decided that it would be funny to make 2 big brass balls. And
no, not the brass balls.
Yeah, well, it's embarrassing, I guess, but it's a fun example of how we can make it into something really fun, because we all thought it was very funny because we were younger back then. But Jesse made 2 like a brass set of truck nuts, and he was using them like a weapon, and he hit a henchman at one point, and the henchman he rolled a 1 on defense, and instead of just immediately dying, I gave the ability that the henchman just went. He just the henchman just looks, and his face hurts, and looks at what he got hit with, and he goes, you know what? Fuck this job. And he just left. And so from then on, the brass balls had a effect of if the person failed a defense roll enough, they would become the brass balls of rage quit. And if you got hit by them, you just whatever your job was, like, nope, I'm out.
I quit. This isn't. You know what? This isn't worth it. This is not worth it.
I didn't wake up today and get expected to hit by truck nuts, and now that I know that's a thing, I ain't coming to work tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? I'm out. And it could just be fun. And like, if you're gonna do that as a GM, that's fine. If somebody else wants to do something stupid, well, now you've made a rule that they can. But you can still have fun with that. Not every game needs to be super serious. We're making this for a movie kind of thing. Yeah, I just got hit in the face with a metal nutsack. No job is worth this. Exactly. And it was that kind of fun. And like, that was the same game where I just would give people perks that were really great. But they were mostly jokes. Like, I gave you the Hello Kitty tramp stamp of Cat's Grace.
Oh yeah, that was Dan. Dan had the Hello Kitties.
Dan had the Hello Kitty tramp of Cat's Grace. And someone had the single jet boot of constant strafing. And then somebody else had the backwards X of self-mutilation. And it was just like, why would we ever use these? Like, I don't know. You wouldn't. Maybe you'll find a use for them, but you got them.
Those were all fun.
Yeah, and it's like, if you want to run a game like that, sure. Like, you know, and you can suddenly just go like, did the stamp provide a permanent effect? Yes, it did. It gave him Cat's Grace. So he had a significant bonus to his dexterity, but the fun part was he wasn't a character that really did that. So you basically had a guy who was not in the rogue position being an excellent rogue, but he just kind of wanted to hang out and not do that. And like, I've also given players stuff that like I set up, and it was very disappointing as a GM. Like, I gave Dan at some point he wanted a lightsaber because he's a big Star Wars fan. He wanted a lightsaber constantly, and they went to a steampunk place, and I gave them a steampunk lightsaber. But I wrote down, it's booby trapped. The second he turns it on, it's going to explode. He never once turned it on. He just wanted it, and it was so disappointing.
He just wanted it. That's all he wanted.
Yeah,
just to have it.
Yeah, but it's that can be super fun. Like, in the moment, it's like, this is frustrating, I'm not enjoying it. But I guarantee you, in the last session when you step back, it's going to be one of those moments where like, that was fun. I did like that. But yeah, sorry, I keep ranting.
I'm on Larka's question. Just summarized kind of what we both said. I feel like there should be not necessarily as much planning. A boss fight is like a big event, and like, you may have like, you're setting up this shop to be something, or the shopkeeper to be something, so like, it might have as much time put into it as that. But I do think, regardless of whether it is a boss fight or you are shopping for furniture for the house, there should be something in that interaction that does matter.
Yes.
And that's, I feel that way about like combat too. If you're just getting mugged and it's not going to matter, that's probably not going to be fun combat, unless you just have like combat hungry players. Otherwise, why? I can't agree more with that. In my opinion, any aspect of a session that does not move the story or events forward in any way is a waste of time and should not be done. Because you only have a limited amount of time to play. Mm-hmm. So if you're not doing something ahead of time, like, why do it? Yeah. Big agree. So thank you, Larka. That was a good question.
Yeah.
I hope that was a satisfactory answer. If not, please say so. If anybody else has questions, feel free to drop them in. But while that's happening, Blight, you had a thing.
A question I had for you is, in your opinion, what is the most important part of a story to flesh out pre-game? As in, like, no, actually, you know what? We kind of already dealt with that one. When do you personally decide to intervene if a player is not getting something they need to?
God, that's a good question.
Do you just let them never get it?
No.
Or do you bring up an old man who's like, oh, I hear you talking about so-and-so. Let me explain that exactly.
It definitely, stamp your bingo card. I'm going to say it depends on the group. But yeah, some groups need that more than others. Some groups will enjoy a multi-session hunt for a single clue, where they need to know where the staff of Alakazam is, and they do not know, and they will just keep looking for it, and they will ask everybody about it. Larka says, "Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Yay!"
Yeah, you're welcome.
And they will take every scrap and nugget and piece of information they can to get where they want to go, and then when they finally get there, they can celebrate. And there are some people that they're like, "Do I know where it is? No. Do I know who to ask for it? No." Well, I guess it's over.
And like at that point, it may not be a bad idea to throw out, like before. This one will be short. I promise. The aspects that I like to use are, I sort of do it in a multi-tier level of clues, where it's like, at first I let them try to figure it out on their own. If they're having trouble, I'll throw out some things that I definitely hint to might help you answer this. Let them choose to use them or not. Like, oh, you see like a wanted poster and it's got the person they're after on it, or I throw out things that they didn't ask about in a way of like, hey, maybe go check that out. And if that doesn't work, I do throw in the old man who's like, hey, let me explain some stuff. But if that doesn't work, I have since pulled back from just being a player character as an NPC. That's just not very fun for anybody, because you literally are holding their hand at that point. And if they still haven't gotten it by then, now they're just not gonna. And I either have to restructure the story around them not getting it, or let them continue not knowing what's about to happen.
Yeah, the one that I guess an example of how I've done it, I had a game with like a SCP kind of style thing where they were, investigating stuff that was real weird and strange, and they wanted to know more, but they weren't really sure what to do, and they kind of hit a few dead ends, and they were like, all right, well, let's go to the library and investigate it through like a specific way. And at that point I was like, okay, I see they really want this. They have tried a few things and it hasn't worked. They're going to find the answer at that library. Like, I will make sure that they open a book at the right time, or an event happens, or something is going to give them the clue, because it is clear that they want it. And if I deny it any further, they are not going to be having fun.
Yes. I think in another way that I would handle that situation is, instead of letting them go to the library and spend the time to look up the book just for the answer, I would say, okay, so you went to the library. You've had enough time to research it. Let me get roles from everybody on like research or whatever skill would be related to that. And judging by the roles, that would be some resource lost, where either it's, oh, you did find it was in a bookstore, you had to lose this much money to find that answer, you have spent this many days here and you're all not well rested, or you've had to spend money on ordering Chinese food at the library, whatever. It's just sort of like a trade-off of like, we're gonna cut to the chase here, but you're just sort of like, you got to lose something for it, because then it's sort of like, hey, this is an option for you players, but just know that there will be a price for it.
Yeah, I think that adds to a level of investment too, where you don't just get something for free. Especially kind of what you're saying, that works into like, oh, well, if we just try something long enough, eventually we'll get it. And there's no like consequence for that. And so that kind of breeds an idea of like, well, we don't really need to try that hard. It's going to happen anyway. But that, yeah, you've ended up giving up a resource for it. I agree. I think that's a very important thing. And it can be all sorts of things: time, money, social status, a thing that that concert you really wanted to go for, you forgot about because you were cramming the books, and you didn't realize till 6 the next morning when you were still at the library studying that you completely missed it.
Yeah. Or you could make it even more intense than that. Like, let's say you roll a research check and you got 4 players and nobody rolls anything higher than a 5. You go, okay, so I'm going to have to ask you guys, what's the most valuable thing one of you guys has that you don't mind losing? Because you're going to have to lose something, because what ends up happening is a guy notices what you guys are looking for and says, hey, I know that stuff, but I'm in the need of XYZ, and I hear you guys got one, so we're going to have to trade for it. Now, at that point, you can go, now, you can either not know this, your stuff, or you're going to lose something. What do you want to do? And that leaves the players with whatever mistake comes, they made that choice. And that's kind of another advice to GMs as far as storytelling is like, let your players choose their own path, especially if it's going to lead to something like them not knowing something. Don't be a dick. And just go, oh, dice said you don't know. Too bad. Hopefully a bear doesn't just kill one of you. You know, the dice are the gods of this world, but they don't have to be 100% obeyed. You can bend what their results are actually saying. Like a 1 does not always mean death.
It's very true.
What if the group chooses the thing they want to lose is another player and they just hand them over? It has happened in the past. We could not figure out how to get rid of a player. I'm not going to go into that story. And we let an assassin kill him. And then he was like, you guys just let me die. And it's like, sorry, I guess you got to make another character. No, fuck that, I'm out. And it's like, darn, we lost him.
Oh yeah, that did happen, didn't it?
It sure did.
I do remember that now.
Dan got possessed, and he got real stabby, and knew who he wanted to stab, and no one was awake enough to stop him. Oh well.
Yeah.
It happens.
Sometimes you gotta get creative with how players leave games.
Imagine if they just remade another character. Oh, we would have dictated how they'd have to do it, and it would have been a, by the way, if you play bad, we let you die. Maybe think about what you do next time.
Yeah, that. If I'm remembering the situation correctly, that player was quite a few problems.
That player is the one that, when we played your zombie game, decided that he ran ahead of people and locked the door, so we just had to deal with it, and while he was safe, and that was the moment we were like, well, he's gonna die. Like, this is an awful player.
Yeah,
that's my character. He's selfish, and it's like, yeah, maybe don't do that next time.
Yeah,
because this is lame. Yeah.
All right. So another question I have for you, that I'm very curious on your thoughts on. How do you prioritize your like must happen events, characters, stuff like that, and your could happen? How do those change for you as players introduce new elements and as the story goes on? And if you have an example of when a must happen turned into a, oh, I don't have to do this anymore.
I do. So the funny thing about that question, I saw that, and I don't prioritize any specific moment. Yeah. I decide it's how I'm feeling at the time of how important is this. Is this something that if they don't do this now, they'll never have another chance? And if it is the case, that's a must do, versus I can work this another way, but I kind of want to have a bad conscience on them after this. And a prime example was you guys trying to get information, and I'm going to just say the name, Oasis, and you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, that happened.
So there was a part in a story where there was in my story that I was talking about where I let them have points, where there was a desert town that was made from a ejected, the part of the world was built from a spaceship crash. It was a massive ship that didn't have landing gear when they finally found another place. They hadn't thought about that. And like the capital kingdom is the ship flipped upside down, buried in the dirt. And it's just like all the spires that were like the antennas and stuff. That's like the towers and things on the castle. But part of the desert was the ejected fuel cell. And it had it was mostly empty. Yeah. But at the bottom of it was still a reserve of fuel that like they had sealed off, but it was 3 towers in the middle of the desert called Oasis that they had built into sort of like a vertical town where each level was like a mall essentially, and there was like civilian levels, and they had like tiers, and like the mayor and stuff lived at the very top. And I told them multiple times, there is fuel gas, there is fumes here that will burn. Do not use anything that explodes or causes a spark. Guy threatened the mayor with a grenade. Mayor didn't give him any information. He was like, "Oh, you don't think I'm joking?" And he accidentally, because of the dice, let it go. They got out. All of Oasis exploded. They're going to get that information from somebody else, but now everyone's going to go, "Weren't you the guys who blew up that town?" So that was a thing of, on the spot, I was like, this would be fun to roll with. I'll let them get that information somewhere else. Originally, it was a must get because that mayor had a piece of a map. Mm-hmm. But then it was like, oh, I'll have them find the guy who drew the map, and he mostly remembers. They didn't get the best map version because that blew up. But, you know, that was an example of like, I don't value any specific moment except on immediate decisions. No, this was a different player.
Yeah, that was not the problem player.
No. And what was fun and how they got away from it is the phone system of that world was, instead of creating a link between people with like a screen, it's a portal. And that's how a guy was able to throw a grenade through the portal. And he blew up. They were essentially floating in a ship above the town. And I was like, oh, so you let the grenade go, and you kind of look out the window and just see a big bright flash of fire rise up, and you guys kind of dodge it a little bit, but the town's just leveled. It is completely gone. Map, everything gone.
Yeah. Discordia says Jesse, but I did not throw the grenade.
You didn't do it.
I did encourage it, though. I definitely got some of Oasis on my hands on that one.
And I've wanted to ask for years, were you guys testing my bluff?
No. I legitimately forgot. You did tell us multiple times there are fumes. But we were so excited that we found out that the phone system was literal portals and you could pass things through them.
Yeah.
And so we were so excited that we were like, oh, we could like do something with this. We could, like shoot a gun or threaten, like reach in and grab something. Like there's so many possibilities. I didn't think throwing a grenade in there was something we were going to do. But it's not something I didn't think couldn't happen at the same time. So yeah, it totally happened. Yeah, the grenade was, oh man.
Yeah, and it's moments like that where it's like, boy, this is really deviating from my story. I could be an asshole GM and forcibly not let something happen, or at the time I could just let it go and yes and the whole story.
Yeah.
And that's why I always vote for that, because at the end of the day, you really want a story. Like, our group made so many fun decisions that kind of feel like war stories. Like, oh, remember that time this happened? We weren't actually there, but we talk about it like we actually fought through some stuff.
That's what This is only slightly related, but I have to point it out. There was that vampire game that you were talking about, and like, I think this is a really good, a really fun example of like player versus character knowledge too, where we did the thing, we messed up really bad, person became godlike, and we were like, oh, all vampires get staked, and then we'll wake up 300 years later. Yes. And we were like, well, it's been 300 years. Oh, people only live like 100 years max. This dude is no longer a problem for us. But there was like a legend of him or something. So we absolutely played up the fact that like we defeated this person or
Yeah,
something.
you killed him. I let you guys do that. I knew. I was like, one of the things, because what everyone kept talking about that, and one of the things everyone forgot was this is going to turn him into an angel.
Yeah.
And no one asked, does that mean he's immortal? Because he is. And like the fact that he's still around, and you guys talked so much shit. Yeah, we killed Michael. Oh, he's dead as hell. And it's like, you mean that guy? And he's like flying around. It's like, that must be another one. Like, what was the name of the guy we killed? Michael, right? Oh, maybe not. If that's him. Oh no, I don't know. We didn't kill that guy, clearly. Like that's
very alive.
Yeah, and that's the fun of it. Is like surprises are another real fun part of being a GM, and I feel like the surprise should be something that kind of rewards everyone, even if it's the reward is fun added to the story of danger. But it shouldn't be like surprise bear trap. Everyone's fucked now. Like I don't know. I don't like that as a GM. I know other GMs can play that well, but I've never enjoyed running a game where it's just hell the whole way through.
Yeah, you gotta have surprises that are in order to have dread, you have to have hope. You need good things to happen that you weren't expecting in order for the bad things to happen that you weren't expecting to have any weight to them.
Yes. A great example of, because I'm thinking about these examples, we can be like something I did as a player in your game versus something you did in my game. The classic story of Blunt Trauma almost killing his friends by backing up a truck. You could have let the dice, like, you could have bent the wheel on the dice, but I feel like, hey, if they survive this is going to be fun. But that's a big if in that situation. And for the short version of, I'll catch everybody up who doesn't know the story. I played a character named Blunt Trauma, and the reason he was called that is I put all my points in strength and nothing in intelligence. I wanted a stupid guy who was all about bodybuilding. In fact, his weapon was he took all the weights off of one side of his dumbbell and put them on the other side and turned it into a mallet. And that was his whole thing. Like, and we were surviving the zombie apocalypse, and he is dumb. I was the only one. We went to a gas station because we were looking for a vehicle. We found a fire truck there. Failed my roll on observation because I'm stupid. Failed my roll on Jesse being like, hey, think about this, because I'm stupid. And I was like, yeah, let me back up. And failed. I rolled a 1 on that. And he could have been, hey, you didn't put it in reverse. You didn't do this. But he said, you know what? Okay. So what happens is you pull a lever that actually just swings the ladder around and it clips all of the fuel lines. So there's just fuel going everywhere. Roll again. And I'm like, all right, another 1. Back up. Okay, there's a zombie underneath the truck. It has a belt buckle. As you roll backwards, it starts making sparks, and now there's a big fire. And I freaked out. I said, I'm gonna slam on the gas. It just says, you did not put it in drive, so when you slam on the gas, you drive backwards real fast, and you crash it into a thing. And now you're away from your friends, and there's just fire going to the office area, whatever that's called, the shop inside of the gas station, and they're about to die. And so I was like, okay, let me please roll well enough to put it in drive and drive into the wall and crash through the wall to help my friends. And I did it, but I didn't roll high enough to not clip a couple of them driving through the wall, and they took some damage, and we did eventually get out of there, and I honestly don't remember how, but that has gone down as like the number one, like, the dice can fuck up the story that I have. But it's again, in the future, it's a great thing to talk about.
Oh man, yeah, that was delightful. I remember trying to make sure it wasn't just like, I wanted to do things actively before, like, oh, you know, because the easy danger is you could hurt your friends, you hurt your party mates. But to be like, okay, again, and also to your point earlier on, like, back of the box thing, is that in that game, it was very clear that, like, death was possible. a wrong decision by you or a wrong decision by someone else could mean death for you or someone else. And so, you know, it was very much like you could make a new character fast, you get him into the story, like, so it worked, but you know, there was that level of tension, and I did want to have it so you did something rather than like immediately like, oh, you did this and you ran over a friend. I was like, well, you're here for fuel. So what's the main thing that I can, you know, cause emotional damage with that isn't another player?
You know what my favorite thing about that whole story, like when I tell the long version and I really tell that story, is and ultimately none of it mattered, because you remember that first observation check I failed? It was to notice that the thing had no gas in it already. So we were about to steal a truck that didn't have any gas in it.
That was on empty.
Yeah, it wasn't empty because we drove it a little bit, but that was the last bit of gas it had.
That was so fun.
Yeah, Blunt Trauma was great. That was such a, yeah. And the whole thing is, I needed the world. That one of our friends was just a stage magician, but I just believed he was really doing magic. So I was like, we've got to protect this guy. He's gonna save the world. He knows magic. So that was my character. I decided was top priority. Save him. And I almost killed him by running him over.
It happens.
Yeah.
So how do you, okay, so if you don't do too many like must happens, how do you incorporate and plan for could happens and adjust them or solidify them? So there's kind of like not two ways you could do it, but there's many ways, but like you have an idea of something you want to happen, and then as you're playing through the game, it kind of calcifies into, oh, this is definitely going to happen now in the future, versus how do you do things that's like, oh, this is becoming more fluid, this must happen is actually going to be turned into this?
You know, once again, it's the reason why I say plan out your ending is everything should help go towards that. And not just because your ending is absolutely necessary. It's the fact of you need to have a drive. Otherwise, your characters, if you just make a world and you decide, I'm going to make the story as I go, I've tried that. It just gets completely chaotic, and I don't know what we're trying to do anymore. There's too many, because like, oh, this town wants this to happen, this town wants this to happen. I don't know what my players are going to do, so I haven't fleshed either of them out. But if you have an end goal, you can sort of set up every action like it's a flow chart in reverse, where, okay, if they do this, this can lead to this, and just think in vagaries, because it's quicker that way. Of like, this can lead to this. How does that go back to what we're trying to do? If it can't, let them have fun. If it does, try to put something in there that will guide them in that proper direction of like, whether it's just an item or an event, or they might meet a person, or they might learn something. Make it that. And if you throw that in there and you've decided now it's a thing that is going to drive everything forward. And I think a good tool is anytime your players are going to enter a new place, have a plan B. If they completely decide to derail and go like, I'm going to knock down this wall, I'm like, what's on the other side of that wall? Have a plan B that could be thrown into literally any scenario of, okay, if they decide to do, I want them to do this, but if they decide to do this, let's have a boss battle that's going to end with, or a fight that's going to end with them meeting somebody that's going to get them some information that they had no idea was there, you know, and it's just happenstance that they found, you know, that kind of thing. I think definitely adding plan Bs into your, you know, or just have, you can literally just do it as, if you're a GM who doesn't like to think on the fly, you can write scenarios that can be put into anything on, you know, flashcards. And if your players do something unexpected behind your screen, you just flip through your flashcards and go, oh, I can use that. Okay, let me do that. You know, but I definitely am say, don't wrangle your players in. It is. I've been on both sides. It's not fun as a GM because you can tell they're probably not enjoying it, and it's not fun as a player because it's like, okay, well, I guess I'll do what you want me to do. I really wanted to do this, you know. It was something we hadn't planned on. It would have been fun, but whatever, you know, that kind of thing. I don't know if that really answered the question.
Kind of. I don't know. I mean, it's a fluid question. I didn't have like this is a hard answer I need for this. It's amorphous for a reason, so it's cool. But I like the idea of a backwards flow chart, actually. Like that makes sense in my head. And honestly is sort of how I think of things and never realized that's how I thought of them. Because you're also adding it, like, you have this goal and you're starting here and you have connectors of how you think it's going to work. But as you move through, you can easily connect, you know, oh, you went this way, didn't expect it. Cool. Well, that can connect from here. Then this actually loops back from here, which now connects to this, and kind of building it as you go with new connections.
Yeah. And the reason I say that, like thinking vagaries and things, is because you will never predict everything your characters might do.
Never.
Like,
you won't.
I have spent this was going to be another question, but I'll just throw it out there because I feel like it's a quick answer. I have made in-depth maps of like what's behind every door, and I have had characters go, well, I'm just leaving, and like, well, I'm not set up for outside. You got to be inside. Well, I'm out. I broke the door down and everything. I could make a steel door. It's triple barred. You can't leave. Why is it triple barred? It's a hotel. We just came in. Why can't we leave? I don't know. And it's like, that's no fun. But if you go, okay, hotel, what can happen in a hotel? Let me write things down. If they decide to do something unexpected, one of those random things occurs. And then I yes and from there and flow chart. Let me do plan A, plan B. What happens there? Plan A, plan B. Let me link it back in here. And if you've pre-planned all that stuff, everything on the side of the flow chart you're not using, harvest that and use it on the new side. Like,
oh man,
you can control the future of a story without your players knowing it, and it's just amount of getting to a end that you have been teasing for a long time.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I think that's helpful. I know, at least for me, and again, some people enjoy improv more than others, and they're not looking for like any sort of resolution in the story. And so they're like, oh, we spent a year-long campaign just kind of dicking around and it was fun. That's cool for some people. I can't spend that amount of time invested in something without a goal. Like, I could easily spend that time doing something else. Like, part of what I get out of RPGs is a shared sense of storytelling. And if we're not doing that, then I do feel like I am missing out.
Yeah. In a way of like how Jack is doing Adventure is Nigh, you can also take that same role and shrink it down to a smaller scale of, you know, let's call Adventure is Nigh seasons, like levels. And it's like, okay, I want this level to end with, turns out the Jade Homunculus is useless. And work your way to that. And then once that's done, you don't have to make a new world. The game's not over. Just make a new mission and do the same thing, you know.
Yeah.
And players writing backwards from a planned end is one of the things I find the most frustrating in narratives I experience. And I'm curious in what ways that's been experienced that's been so negative.
I'm also curious about that, Narf, because I feel like the issue might be bad storytelling, not a particular method of storytelling.
Yes, because I want to get the point I want to get across is when I say work towards an ending, I'm not saying my players got to be level 30. We've got to be in this kingdom. They've got to have all this stuff, and they're gonna fight this guy, and they're gonna lose, like that kind of thing. No, it's more that what is the end? Like example, the vampire story. They're gonna fight a god. That's it. That's all I've got. I don't have anything else built to that, but I want to help myself keep the narrative on track by remembering what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you example with the you mentioned with Adventure is Nigh. So season 1 was about the Jade Homunculus. We didn't know exactly what it was. We didn't know exactly what it did the whole time, but we knew that was the goal. We had to get it, or our goal was to get it, and then take it to where we thought it should go. And where we thought it should go changed over the course of the game. What it meant to us changed over the course of the game. What it actually was changed as we learned more about it. But that was I'm sure for Jack, but definitely for us too, we kind of working backwards for this is what we want.
Yeah. And I mean, like the whole thing of what I was saying earlier, if you want to do it in like small sections, but you do want your world to literally be open. Like you said, you run Sims. Like if you want to do a RPG like SimCity or something where I've set up everything and here it is, and I want things to play out how they want it to play out. Well, you still have small goals that you could work towards. Like, hey, the town needs water. How are they going to work on that? If they start going, let's not concern ourselves with that, you can drive the story that way. But remember, you're going away from the goal that you were trying to get them towards. And now you have to face a punishment of they're running out of water. So if you bring that up again and your players go, I don't care about the water problem, you kill them. Or you go, well, now your town doesn't have water. What are you trying to do? Because I have no idea where to go from here. You can't survive without water. Like, that's the problem with just letting them go anywhere with no goal in mind. Of they may completely destroy the structure of the story, and you cannot move past that because they've just goofed too much and now they're far away from it. If you want to make a big open world where let's take the city and go in a whole like country, and they go, I don't care about that city. Well, then the goal of they need to make this city good should not have been placed in a giant world. It should have been just that story. Having an M-boss where they have to fight all the friends they make throughout the journey would have been would be Jesse's kryptonite.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I say that did turn out to be the case is what I knew the actual ending was. I wanted them to fight a god. When it became an apocalypse story, I changed that particular section of the game to they want to turn the world back to what it was. There's a thing in Vampire, and I'm sure I'm not using it properly, and Discordian's probably going to call me out on it, but that's the rules I set up for the game, so that's how it worked. Where there's a thing called that they can reach called Golconda, which is essentially like Nirvana, and there's a race called the Salubri that are healer vampires. And there's a rumor that even in this apocalyptic time, out on the other side of the country, there was a Salubri that had reached Golconda. You're trying to reach them to convince them to turn the world back to normal. That was the storyline's goal. My personal goal from the start was I wanted them to fight a god.
Narf answering the question, the question we asked Narf that Narf said to us. And oh boy, Narf, do I want to dig into this. So Narf says, I think a lot of sloppy writers write backwards in such a way that opens characters up to unbelievable failures in logic. I also think it frequently leads to a lot of stories being stretched out in order to build up to, instead of having successive stories build off each other. Yeah, everything you just mentioned is not because of working backwards, but because of a failure of storytelling.
Yes.
That's a thing that drives me. I'm with you, Narf. That's a thing that drives me up the wall in horror, especially, where you have people who, you have a person that does a thing and you go, that's stupid. Why would they do that? And the answer is, because, they have to, in order to get murdered, they have to be alone. So they're going to investigate this creepy noise by themselves. And it's like, but why would they do that? Nothing in the story has told me that this character would do this action. That's stupid. So yeah, that is a failure of writing the story, that you have not clearly put out why that is going to happen. Not you, Narf, but like you, the storyteller, the writer, has not clearly pointed out that this is why this is going to happen.
And also, that is a person who is shackled to their ideas, because what you can easily do, because if someone is creating failures in logic, they have decided that this is how they're going to solve this problem. And if they don't do it, oh well, they didn't get it. Because what I'm talking about is not even working backwards, is knowing where you want it to end up. Like, sort of having something on the horizon. I'm not even saying I work backwards. In fact, that's the first thing I do, is I want to start here. Then I come up with a background or a beginning that is probably the furthest from the ending it could possibly be. And I just know, as a tool, each session I want to push towards that. I have no plans on the links between the two, except for random things that may happen that I think would be fun, but they can happen anywhere, anytime. Ultimately, I need to keep the narrative going. That is the end goal that people want to get to. When, like, the Jade Homunculus is a good example. That's just an item. Jack could have planned that each session he's getting more and more ideas on how he wants that ending to play out. He could have had a whole different idea of what it is. But at the end, that's when he decided that, okay, now they found it. This is the end. How do we want this to play out? But the entire time, they knew what they were trying to do. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not necessarily work backwards where I'm going to plan every step of the way. It's just each session should push more towards that ending.
Yeah, and I think you mentioning that each session should push towards that ending, Narf, exactly what you brought up, that the story's being stretched out rather than having successive stories build on top of each other. You absolutely should have, regardless of how, like, whether you're moving backwards or not, important storytelling is building on top of what previously happened, and like having that matter and change whatever it was, that it should be a brick that's building the structure. And that all of that is, if a person is missing that in the story, then it is an unfortunate failure of storytelling, whatever story they're telling or whatever way they're trying to tell it.
Yeah. And honestly, and this is, this whole thing may sound like intimidating to a new GM, but if that's the issue, don't take it as super criticism. Take it as a learning experience. Like, okay, let me do that differently next time. Or even next time, just being next session, you can just go, hey, there's no rule that says you can't go, hey guys, I feel like the last time we did this, it wasn't very fun. So I kind of want to, can I retcon some stuff to fix it? And then we can move on from there, because I've got some new ideas. Like, and if you've got a group that goes, no, we can't do that, that's stupid, then it may not be the best group for you. Because if you're having to do that, but if you're a new GM with experienced players, that's typically not a great combo unless they're like willing to sort of play ball with you to help you learn your own style. Because every GM has a different style. Like, the amount I prepare per battles and stuff would disgust some GMs, because here's the secret. I have never once made a character sheet for an enemy. It has always been on the fly, thinking of the numbers. I have no idea what their health is usually, and I just decide they've done enough damage. I don't plan hardly at all, but I would wager my players can't tell that, because the narrative that I tell in the battle is the same that would be if I like write down how much health they've got.
Lord Refa bringing up, saying, I'm not saying I like PCs being...
This is Narf. You said
Refa. Sorry, Narf. I did say Lord Refa. Wow. That's not even... because
of the ref.
Not even on my screen. Dang. Narf. It says, I'm not saying I like PCs being thrown into an open world with no guidance. Rather, I like giving a party initial situation that they have to deal with and several competing factions that push and pull PCs in different directions. I don't think that's a bad way to do it. I personally like having a more substantial goal in mind, and I personally like playing games where it is more than just that. I like that there is an idea for not just me but for everybody as a kind of goal. And I think that comes down to style. Like if that's how you like running a game and that's how your players like running a game, that's perfectly fine. The main thing is that this is entertainment. Like, this is fun.
I would say I like Narf's answer because it actually moves into what I was going to ask you next, and I want to dedicate some time to this because it's a complicated question. Okay. Well, it's a kind of complicated question, but it's a big answer. But you can also I don't see any problems with, because what you're saying, Narf, doesn't actually sound that different than what I'm saying. It's just it doesn't have an end plan, which is fine. You could write it like a sitcom where the beginning is the driving force. Like, the beginning is your bounty hunters. So every session, once you find your target, we'll make a new target. We don't have a plan because this could potentially go on endlessly. And their drive is, we're doing this together, and they learn that at the beginning. That's fine too. But even then, from each session, the end goal is that what they want is whatever the new issue is. You don't have to have a grand ending plan, but you do have to have a goal plan, and that could have been established from the beginning. And they could take any opportunity they could, because you could let's use the bounty hunter example. They're bounty hunters. You have a world set up. They go, hey, I heard about that, the railroad. Let's go there. And you can decide, is that where the person is? If not, what are they going to find there? If it's nothing, it's probably not a good plan. But if it's like, hey, they get a better gun that they can use to hunt down the bounty in another place, sure, that's fine. But going with no plan, as far as where you want your NPCs to go, or your PCs to go, is poor planning, in my opinion. But the question I wanted to ask, as far as like the start, is what is your personal favorite way to start a story, and what's one of your favorite examples of how you've done it?
I don't know if I have a favorite way. I don't think session 0 counts, because that's my favorite, because that's before the session. Yeah, session zeros are amazing.
And I'll explain why. If I can take, because I've thought about this and I can answer mine pretty quick. And it's an example that pulls from a character from the story about Guy's thing, where I was the sorcerer who wanted to take over the world, and he got a kingdom and all that stuff. The character's name was Ouroboros. I pulled my character. I said, in the future, he becomes extremely powerful and he wants to take over everything, and he's an absolute tyrant. And 4 people, which were my players, kill him in the future. He then masters the teleport spell to the point where he can go back in time. He sets up a meeting with these people. And he also uses illusion spells to look like different people, where because he can't directly kill him, that changes the timeline too much. He convinces them to do something that ultimately is a tremendous crime. They ended up letting 3 tremendously evil fiends, very powerful entities, out into the world, which Ouroboros is I'm gonna kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. I'm gonna make an infernal army for me in the future by having them release them from their current prisons. They'll go to jail for life. They won't be able to become strong enough to beat me. They won't even know their destiny. Cut to the future. And that's their whole thing. And so each one of them had a session with me where they were doing that little story of what crime they committed, why are they in jail, and at their first session they were going to meet in jail. But the fun part about that is they were all going to know something intrinsic to the story that the others didn't know. They had the opportunity to not share that information, and several of them did. And that was really fun, of them going like, oh, there's somebody you met on your journey last time that you're going to run into, and other people are not going to know who that is, but you will. Do you want to bring that up? Because you're technically on the run because you broke out of jail.
That is a cool setup for characters meeting and getting to know each other.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I really enjoyed that. No,
that's cool. Okay, then I will say session 0, and specifically the interactive backstory session that I made, because the way I like on the subject of what information you should plan versus what you should freestyle, in improv, I like having a set world where I ran the magical girl anime campaign for some players, and I was like, here's the world, modern day, got it, boom, cool. Here's what you need to know about magic, about how this works, about, the tone, all of that, a little bit about the world. And then, so I have the establishment. I knew that emotions were a big deal because the monsters in that campaign that they had to fight were made up of 3 emotions: a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary emotion. So
that's neat.
Like loneliness, anger, and regret. And then those 3 emotions would shape what the creature was and influence how they acted and how they could be defeated through combat, through negotiation, through whatever the players do. So having all that and knowing that those are going to be a big deal, having those play into the interactive backstory session, saying okay, I want to know about your character's mindset. I want to know about their, how they, when they bring up something, how they feel about it. So having that set up, and then having a character, all right, tell me about your character. And then they start their thing. And then I can introduce an event and, lay a token down, and they get their token, and they explain how they react to the event that I just presented, and other players do that too. And then adding to that and be like, if I don't get something specific out of it, and saying, how did that make you feel? What were the ramifications of that? Did that influence your belief on X? So I love that, because then I have, again, kind of that end goal, or a bit of an end goal in mind. And that one, I didn't actually have an end goal. I was like, I know I want them to be magical girls, and they're not at the beginning of the story. But they will be. And I actually got the end boss and where the campaign would end partway through. But I knew basically how it would build up to what it would be, and then there was a question mark at what it would be is.
Right.
And so having them be able to do that back and forth, it was through that I got to learn what they wanted out of it, and then what they wanted out of their characters and how their characters interacted, and then got to build a stronger foundation of the story from that point on, because I knew all of that. So that's definitely my favorite way, because I want their input.
Yeah, and I love the starting with a session 0 because of the ability to give somebody something that other people may not have. They have the option to share or not. Another example of the guys meeting in jail thing was one of the guys, his crime was he got convinced by this little red dragon to free his brother dragon, who was being held as a piece of treasure because he was made of gold, and what it was is that he was a massive 2-headed red and gold dragon that had been separated. The red one had been freed, but the gold one was still in prison. And when you, oh no, my brother, please save my brother, you let him out, they fuse back together, and now they're a massive dragon that's wreaking havoc on everything, and you get caught. The knowledge he got was the location of a mine that's filled with fake treasure, because what it used to be was the gold dragon's nest, and when he would shed, his scales look like coins, but they're not real coins. So it's the guy was like, well, if we need money, I know a place where we might be able to fake it, but I know we're prisoners and I don't know if getting counterfeit money is the best idea. But I feel like there might be some other stuff in there too. I didn't really look when I was there. And like another monster, the other two fiends were, there was a king who had a starving kingdom, and he needed this one item to, break the curse of his kingdom and let the water flow again. And it was the sob story, and the character's like, oh yeah, I want to go help them. And this was 2 players, and they did this whole thing, and there was a ton of defense keeping them from there. And they oh, you guys fought real hard and you made it there, and you finally given that. And turns out what it was is you were delivering the last item that this one dying king needed to turn to a lich. And he did, and he rose his entire kingdom as a giant undead army. But what they learned was the location of certain artifacts that would be very useful later. And like the last person found a tomb of a sealed spirit, and it was it was shown as a ghost. She was like, oh, I just want to, my husband was trapped in this one artifact, and I need you to break it so that his soul is freed, and I want him to join me in the afterlife. And so they were actually took some convincing, but they did it. And turns out what it was a sealed spirit that whatever it goes into creates a construct of that material. So the first thing it went into, because it was deep in a cave, was the cave wall itself, and it turned into a giant mountain that was a big construct, like just a living mountain now. It suddenly got up and started walking. But what they learned was how to capture that spirit because of what it was trapped in. But they didn't know where to find that stuff. And it was like a lot of interesting stuff where it's like if the player didn't remember, it would be fun to be like, oh, I kind of remember, but I don't. And the game didn't get that far, unfortunately, but kind of setting up like that. And it's you can have a lot of fun with session zeros like that.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Crawdad chimed up with a thing that he's done. It says, I started a campaign with all the PCs at a festival and introduced some flavor. It introduced some flavor to for the setting. Bad guys did a thing, and the PCs acted individually to stop them and met each other in the course of the action. That's cool.
Yeah, I like that.
That's a really neat idea. I like having that neutral space, sort of. What were you gonna say?
Oh, no, that's what I was going to say. I really like that plan. I could think of a lot of really fun ways to mess with that. But what are some ideas for this is just general question since we're talking about story. What's some ideas for a plot that you just haven't gotten to use yet? Because I know you have some. It's like one day I'll use that, and I just haven't.
Yeah, I've got some. I really want, it's been on my mind.
Yeah.
Deep says I've got one, but I don't want to say because I'm going to use it someday, I swear.
Well,
you will.
Yeah, like don't say the last bit of it, but like don't be like, oh, ultimately it's going to end up with this, but like what's like a start of a game like in a specific system that you want to use? Because like I've been running through with that because I'm trying to learn Wraith enough to run a campaign, but I know how I want the campaign to start, but I haven't gotten to do it yet.
More of a campaign setting, but the things that I really want to do within it too is that like everybody plays a bug campaign where everybody's like a really small, some sort of like, 1.5 inch to smaller bug, and like their world seems so fantastical and like wild, but it's just mundane things happening to them that they don't understand. And I have some ideas, and I want to play with like the actions we as people take that are perceived and are like felt in a very different manner because it's being done to something that we're not considerate about, or we're not aware of how our actions can affect things in a different way. So that's something I've been mulling over for a while.
That's fun. What I want to do in Wraith, because the whole concept of Wraith is the thing that's binding you, keeping you from Oblivion, and also binding you from Ascension, is whatever your unfinished business is, and that's usually tied to some sort of what are they called? It's like a trinket. They have a name, but I can't think of what it is. But so a fun thing to do for Session Zero is you tell me what your unfinished business is, but the fact is you don't remember how you died. Like, that's a big part of that. So you tell me what your unfinished business is, and I'm gonna weave a narrative that ties into that. But I'm not gonna tell you what it was. But I am gonna give you slight clues here and there. Yeah, Fetter, that was it. So it's like, if someone's like, oh, my unfinished business is, this is for another thing, but like an example that I use for unfinished businesses, I hid a treasure my family didn't know about, and I, was wanted from the mob, but they've killed me for it, but they never found it. I want them to find it. I left a series of clues. Problem is, I really overestimated how clever my family is, and they have not been able to figure out my clues. So they don't know where my treasure is. That kind of thing. But then I would go, like, I would build on that and be like, okay, what your unfinished business or what your fetter is would be something like a thimble. And like, why? Like, that's for you to figure out. What does that have to do with what your unfinished business was? And that kind of thing, and work with that. But I kind of wanted to set up a story where while you're trying to figure out your own unfinished business, you are sought out by a group of other wraiths or other spirits who want to help people finish their unfinished business. The problem is, because of Karen's law about you can't interact with the living, we kind of have to be a little bit we have to be a little secret that we're doing this. So it's sort of like a private investigator, but helping, like, if they can afford our service, you're going to go up, mess with people, kind of figure out what their unfinished business was. While you're up there, though, I'm not going to penalize you for trying to figure out your own. That kind of thing.
Yeah. That's a cool idea. That is really neat. Yeah. We're about out of time, but Koning asked a question that I definitely want to bring up.
Okay.
It says, so people praise Dark Souls and Bloodborne for being, for setting up the first areas to sort of condition the player. Go slow, you don't have to fight everything, there are secrets in every room. Does this apply to D&D at all? Or is it your job to adjust the player? It absolutely applies. Like, yes. How you, kind of what you were saying with back of the box, like you want them to be aware of that kind of beforehand, but also, yes, absolutely use the game itself, just like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, to reinforce that. I always try to, make sure players know that, unfortunately, a lot of stuff like D&D, which is combat focused, channels players into thinking, fighting solves everything. And I try to reward and offer situations where combat is not the only solution, and that they can use subterfuge or negotiation or bribery or all sorts of different things that even I haven't considered. And they're like, can I try this? And I want to go, you can, and might work, might fail. Try and fail forward.
But the fact that you go, yeah, you can.
Yeah. Like... And to not punish them immediately. So like they go up and like, I want to talk to this goblin and say hello. And then I go, cool, roll initiative. The goblin hits you first for 10 sneak damage. I have taught that player a lesson that things are going to murder you right away. If that's their first, their first interaction with the world, that's how they're going to think about it. So yes, it's very important that you, in the game itself, reinforce the things that you have tried to tell them outside of the game.
Yeah. If you're like, get your players together and they go, hey, I want to make I want to be the guy level trying to kill you game. Would you like to play?
Mm-hmm.
And then the first session is you wake up, a spike trap is coming right at you. What do you do? Like, then you've set up, oh, I wasn't joking. I'm killing you at every instant I can. That kind of thing. But if you definitely don't want to be like, hey, you want to play a casual RPG with me? And then you go, a spike trap's coming at you as soon as you wake up. Like, that's a trick. Don't do that.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, we're kind of out of time, so we don't have time to really answer it. But, like, any advice you would give to a new GM, one of the things I would definitely say is a practice we had with new GMs, which really works, is rewarding character and players. It works both ways. Rewarding players for being in character. Like, if you do something specifically in character, you can get, you got a little bit more XP because you were specially in character, or that was a really good roll, or like, the whole, oh, you did something super awesome, I gift you one re-roll that you can use whenever you need it, that kind of thing. There's no rule that says you can't do that. It doesn't break the game, and it's just sort of especially if this is a new group. Everybody needs, in a brand new group, for especially the first couple sessions, the seriousness, I feel like, should be pulled back to about 70%. Like, if someone wants to experiment because they're getting they're dipping their foot in the water, let them see how they do it. And if it's like, oh, if they're going to do this a lot, I don't really like that, start letting them do it less. But definitely let people try stuff early on and then decide how you want to go from there.
They also asked one more question that I do kind of want to get into if you have a moment.
Yeah,
we're over time, but
I'm off. I'm off today. I could go to whatever. I don't care.
They also asked, what I find difficult in this figuring out, and it's very present in Jack and Adventurous Night, is the difference between a player figuring out something and the DM telling the player and figuring out based on their role. So what I think I'm reading from this is like player knowledge versus character knowledge, but also, if I'm reading this right, Koning, figuring like how the character is understanding the information they're given. Yep. Is that sort of, I think I might be
what it kind of sounds like is Koning is bringing up a point we talked about earlier, where it's like, when do you decide to intervene, or when do you let them just kind of blow in the wind about, whatever they're trying to figure out? Like, if the dice just didn't teach them something, like, the difficulty of figuring something out is like, where do you push the narrative? Mm-hmm. So it's the players figured it out or you told them.
Okay.
And that kind of brings back to what we were saying earlier of how do you value a specific moment?
Yeah. Oh man, I'm gonna try and answer like the 3 questions I'm reading in this.
Okay.
The 3 different things. So I feel like for what you're saying in the moment is very important in like the pacing. Is if they just learned some critical information and you need a lull in the story, then their figuring out is a clue that they will get, that they can figure out later, that they'll get more information to later. So, you don't want to have like information. You solved a riddle. You want peaks and valleys in your story. And if you need it to slow down a minute, then this is a clue. If they rolled well, they got information, but you don't want them to know, you don't want them to have the whole thing. You just give them a piece of it. If you're in a valley and you need it to peak, what did they discover? They discovered that key thing that they need to know. Maybe there was a clue earlier, maybe it's the whole thing now. But in this moment, they now understand, they now know, and they have the information they need for whatever. So that's one way to solve it, with information. And then the other 2 kind of rely on the player knowledge versus character knowledge. Part of the player knowledge versus character knowledge falls on the player, and sometimes the GM has to call them out on it. where you were saying with blunt trauma, where you're like, I know what to do, but blunt trauma is an idiot. So
yeah, he doesn't know what to do.
Right. And like playing into that. And that could be, you don't necessarily have to play it into like, well, he's an idiot, so he's going to make the wrong decision. He's going to make a bad decision. He's just not going to make the obvious choice or the, oh, I know what this is, but I only know this because of, you know, context and things that I know outside of this. What would the character know about this? Yeah. And then that's kind of up to the player to kind of play with, and the GM also, I feel like, can reward playing within character. And sometimes GM being like, now to, you know that you have to sear a Hydra so it doesn't grow two heads. Does your character know that, though? Are they really going to shoot acid onto that as their next action? Really? Like, is that...
Yeah.
How do they know that? And then the third part of that, getting the character knowledge in the role. Playing into what the character... Trying to remember, like, what the character has learned. And tying it into something directly there. So, a thing that I've talked about with Jack a bit in... for Dikaria, the mushroom folk, that's like, oh, if you want to use this, you can, is genetic memory, because they're generally short-lived and they inherit a lot of memories and information from the different Dikaria that have, you know, put spores in whatever grew their cap. So, you know, Dikarias can be aware of something that they haven't experienced.
Yeah.
So that might bring up a genetic memory, you know, something familiar. If another character, you know, it's like, oh, if it was something like Dabarella, where it's like, you care about this person. You don't want to fight them. You care about them. And you know that when you're hangry, what you really want is this. And that might solve the issue. So like trying to play it with the character specifically. So the more you know about the character, the more you understand the character, the more you've been able to kind of back and forth role play with them and have them influence the world, the more you can kind of incorporate that sort of knowledge and cultivate something that's revolving around them in that moment.
Yeah, and kind of what we were talking about earlier about, you know, how do you evaluate a specific moment? It's really not a moment. It's like what information they're trying to get, how important is it, that kind of thing. You can... and you talked about this when you interviewed Jay, and I mentioned that I did this in the chat, but I'd like to bring it up here again. You can just lie. Like, you can, if you're like, if you have a GM screen, I did this all the time when my players were just like not finding something. If anybody found something I could use to help get them information, it would be like, I look around the room, what do I find? And it'd be like, okay, they're going to find a spell book that, you know, just an example. They're going to find a spell book that tells them what they need to know. And I would just roll a dice like I was rolling a percentage. I was like, oh, good. Okay, you did find it. But it didn't even roll the right dice. It was just for the sound effect. You know, it's like, if it's super important, you could just lie. Like, like I said, your job is to make the game engaging. And if it's like, and let me tell you, a mistake I made was not doing that one time. The game where you know, they blew up Oasis. Every opportunity they had to find out key information for the big twist of the story, they failed. And I was like, I'm going to ride this out. And I gave them so many opportunities. They failed every single time. And then almost out of spite, I let the world blow up anyway. Because they never learned that was going to happen. And it's not very fun. But it's like, that was the moment I was like, I'm not going to let that happen again. Because they were upset by the ending. And I was like, let me explain what happened in every moment you didn't find this out. And then they were like, okay, but why couldn't we have just kind of found that out? Because we didn't even get an end to the game. I was like, I know, it's impressive. I gave you about 20 opportunities to learn one thing, and you never did.
We never did. We
but
really bungled it.
It really was kind of just like a bad end, and I didn't really like it. Because you got to remember, especially if this is your first RPG as a GM, this is not a video game. If they mess up, that's the end. You don't get to go back to a save and see what else could have happened. So unless you want to set that up, because again, no rule that says you can't. Like, you could make save points in a game. That would be interesting.
Could be.
But yeah, like the idea that I had talking to Deebs about when we were trying to join a game where neither of us could really be on that often, but what if we shared one character who had two personalities, where every time we would join, we would have to be informed where we were, and we'd look at our character sheet and be like, why do I have all this stuff? Because each like personality would have different skill sets. And it's like, oh, we don't have the barbarian this time, we have the detective. And it's like, that would be an interesting thing, but our GM, you know, to a fair point, he was like, I'm not really experienced enough to handle that, but I want to do that so bad. I would love to have a character that's controlled by two people who are never in the room at the same time.
We did not discuss this beforehand. I want the literal opposite. I want a character that is like two entities in one body, and so when like myself and someone else controls this character, and like we can argue with each other about something, and like literally to the other characters, it's a person talking to themselves, and like that you're hearing everything we're both saying, but that this is only coming from one person. I would love to do that.
Discordian, that would be one of my first test runs of that, is running a Malkavian that did that, because the Vormans, they were one Malkavian, but they were two Toreadors. A Toreador and a wannabe Ventru.
Yeah.
But they were one Malkavian. Which was fun, because that would mean in the game they would try to do disciplines and wouldn't be able to do them. Because that's not what they are. But like, there was a character I played, and I can not for the life of me remember what it was. I think it was called Binder, that we played in one session, where my whole thing is I would let ghosts possess me and I would get their skills, but if I failed the possession roll, I would get their negative qualities as well. And it was so fun to play. I was so upset every time I do a successful roll, because there was like one character was like, the reason he died is he got exhausted and he spent too long in a battle and he died. So if you fail your roll, if your fight lasts for more than 12 rounds, you just quit. And you like go to the side and you just stop fighting. Or there was like one where it's like, you're possessed by the spirit of a little girl. She was very into the cult. She knows a lot about this stuff, but she's a little girl. You don't get her skills. She just fully possesses you. So the player has to be a little girl for a while. And that was so fun to do. And I would love a game where like, it's so hard to say this without sounding like I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I would love a game that uses mental illness as a character trait, and like the multiple personalities being controlled by more than one character, the binder being like, they have different tendencies and stuff like that, but you can't do that. So like, I would love a way to do that, because it sounds like I want to throw mechanics that change the game up. Like I remember Guy wanted to do something where every character had a theme song, and every time he would play the game, he'd build a list. We had like 5 players, but he'd build like a 200 song playlist, and he'd let it on random every time we'd fight. And if your theme song was playing, you got bonuses in all your categories.
That's fun.
But like, you don't have to be a slave to the game's system. You can change it however you want, but again, if you do that, you've got to stick with it.
Mm-hmm. And you got to be aware, if you break something, it is going to break in other places too, which is a huge annoyance I have when people talk about like 5e and stuff, where they're like, well, yeah, but you just homebrew it. And it's like, okay, yeah, you could change the whole game to be something different, but it's going to have ripple effects. A game system is a glass window. Like if you want to get rid of one part of it or change one part of it, you're just like, oh, I don't like this part, I'm just going to pop it out and then I can put what I want there. That's fine, but it's going to create cracks elsewhere, and you need to be aware that it's going to create cracks elsewhere. Try to predict where it's going to put those cracks, and also be ready to deal with when you find out it has fundamentally broken something you were not expecting or aware of.
Yes, I have a great example of that in that Pathfinder game where I did the point system. You made a character who invested all of his points in sneaking and doing high damage with shotguns,
Yeah.
where you were a bird creature who could jump out of the shadows, fire 2 shots in one turn, and my characters had to go, what was that?
Oh man, you
And
start breaking up right when that.
Set up a,
Oh, you're breaking up.
You got all choppy for me.
Oh, there you go. But yeah, so I was a harpy who put all my points in stealth and using a shotgun. So I would jump out, if I was hearing you correctly, I'd jump out of the shadows, shoot 2 shots, and then retreat with like
and I had to play it as my characters did not know what had, like, they're like, what was that noise? And like their friend would be just blown apart on the ground. They weren't allowed to see him because it was so stealthy. And they were like, what happened? And it was like incredibly loud. So what I had to do to adjust that was I had to make a house rule because I wasn't going to take away what everyone had earned. But I realized the game had been broken in like 16 ways from Sunday. But I had to make a rule that I understand, you know, how it is. But from now on, no matter what we are rolling, a 20 is a success and a 1 is a failure. Does not matter what they roll. If someone's trying to spot you and you roll a 45 on sneak, but they get a 20, they will see you. Otherwise, you guys are just going to fly through this game with no challenges.
That is true, because I think my sneak was in the 40s.
It was about 45. I still have the character sheet somewhere. But yeah, like people were going absolutely crazy. But because of the free form of that game, people got really creative with how they would do things. Like I remember Derek was playing, and he was a stone mage, and he decided that at one point he was going to do a massive amount of damage by riding a spire of crystal really high up into the air, and then taking his mallet and smashing the top of it and letting it rain like glass shards onto the field. And I was like, how do I make that roll? And so we just went, okay, so here's what we're going to do. You don't have an idea. We're going to see how big your crystal shards are. And so I rolled a D4, and like each one's going to do this amount of damage. Then I rolled a D100 of how many there are. And he ended up doing, I think it was like 64 counts of 3 damage each over the whole field. So then I had to split it up over how, like, what that was going to be per character. And it was like I was losing that game, but it was so fun that I would never have done it a different way, because it let me, the lack of structure in the rules allowed everybody to be very creative, but it also allowed me to be creative. Yeah. And it was that was competitive storytelling at that point, because like the roles really didn't matter anymore. It was just this happens or this happens. I'm gonna counter. Fun outweighs rules. Yeah, that is definitely the case. Now you can that wave can be as far apart as possible. Like the rules are way out here, I'm way off, but I'm having fun, or they can be pretty well matched. But the player should be enjoying the game is the key that a GM needs to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody, GM included, should be enjoying the game.
Yeah, and if your players are like, and if you know you're like, well, my players like combat, then give them combat. But if they suddenly go like, hey, I'd like to do something that's not fighting, don't go, no, it's fun for me to fight you guys. Everyone should be included. But also you condition the player so that they could do silly stuff like that. Exactly. Like that was the same game where Jesse made the brass balls of Rage Quit.
Different character, but yeah.
Yeah, different character. But, you know.
And it was fun because we had that sort of creative freedom. And that we had the rules of, you know, well, we're using Pathfinder, but we're going to make it a point-buy system, and you can buy whatever you want. So, like, I remember in that campaign, we were all absolute glass cannons.
Yes,
like,
you were.
If we didn't destroy whatever it was, if we entered combat and it was not destroyed on round 1, we needed to get out of there, because none of us were taking more than maybe a hit. Because it also cost points for HP. And I was like, every one of us was like, why would I put points in HP when I could put points in spell casting or stealth or shotgun use or, you know,
I could
whatever
get another
it was we're
tier.
doing.
I could get another tier in fire conjuration, and why would I get more HP when I could make a minigun out of pure fire?
Right.
What?
That sounds more fun than having a D whatever of HP. So I'm going to go with the minigun of fire.
Yeah. Oh, Discordian. It was a pure mess.
Oh, absolutely. But it was so fun.
That's the thing. Like, if you love structure in a game, definitely don't do that. But if you love, like, I love throwing complete like left turns and trying to correct my own story and watching my players go, what, this is happening? Like, yeah, I don't know how it's going to turn out either. Let's do it together. You know, that's really fun for me. And the creativity of that whole thing, like, was such a fun time. But I feel like if I had a player who really likes knowing a rule system and knowing the exploits and like I know exactly what I want to do, they would hate that. And like that's another thing you have to consider when forming a game is your group.
Yep.
Your group is such an important thing, and that's why it's always kind of a, you want to add more people, but you just sometimes like, I don't think you'd be a good addition to the group. Nothing on you, but you would hate the game we're playing right now. And I want to make everybody happy.
Yeah. And also as a player joining a group like that, or you know, possibly joining a group where it's like, be willing to try something different. You know, like if you're usually min-maxing, but this group isn't about that, try just going with a concept. Stretch your legs in that way, in a different way.
Yeah, it's like effectively the players and the GM are both the writer and editor of the story. Like, you're submitting it to them, they edit it, they submit to you their change, and you approve it or not. That's really all it is. And if you're like, I'm gonna kill you guys, and they go, we're gonna try to not kill this, like, that definitely would stop me from killing you. Let me fix that, because I gotta kill you. GMing may not be your thing. I'll just be honest with you. And or you may not, the group, there's probably groups out there who love that.
Probably.
I don't know of one, but they could be.
Yeah.
But you know, definitely let yourself be open to new ideas is a very good advice, like what you just said.
Yeah. All right, we're like 30 minutes over now, so we should probably stop.
Yeah, all right.
This was really fun though. Thanks, Blight.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm glad you got to come on. We got to talk about this. I hope this was helpful for everybody in chat too.
I hope so.
That's, you know,
I can't tell people how to be good storytellers. Not saying I'm a good storyteller, but I hope I can give advice to spin your own skills in a way that people like engaging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was good. I like that. That was a good note to end on.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. I guess that's it. I'm gonna say bye, but first, it says RGB Blight on YouTube, so you can go there and check out Safe State Cinema and stuff. And Blight's always in the Discord and does Thursday night stuff with me on here to play games.
And on Tuesday nights on our Discord, you can join us for watching whatever the next video game movie is. The number's rising. The last tally I had was 177, and we just did our 62nd one, which was House of the Dead.
House of the Dead, so better than expected.
Not good, but fun to watch.
Oh yeah, definitely not good, but it had fun moments.
Yeah, but if you're just down for a free movie every Tuesday, check out the Discord and suffer with us, or find a really good hidden treasure like Werewolves Within.
Yeah. Also, the first Tomb Raider movie, that's a solid movie. I stand by Tomb Raider. The first Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie was a fun action movie I had never seen before. And it got dunked on real hard, but like, man, that was good. I miss Liberty. She was the best.
Yeah.
And then she died. Don't know why.
She taught the lesson of even if you know kung fu, don't do it against zombies.
Against a literal never-ending horde of zombies.
Yeah, that it looks like the rejected footage from a Rob Zombie music video. Yes.
It does. All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thanks again, Blight.
Yeah, no problem.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Oh, the music's fading.